Have you ever heard of a weapon so disturbing that its creators tried to conceal its existence? Well, allow me to take you on a journey where, amidst the chaos of battle and the quest for victory, there emerged a weapon so chilling that it sent shockwaves through the ranks and left a mark on the course of history. So what could this weapon be, and why did its creators attempt to hide its existence? Well, let's find out. Back in the day, there was this gutsy guy named Kublai Khan, who was all set to follow in the footsteps of his famous grandfather Genghis Khan. He had this big plan to take over Japan with an army of 30,000 tough fighters. Picture this, he's in Japan, not just to take in the sights, but to take charge. His Mongol crew snagged a couple of islands like Tsushima and Iki, but when they got to Hakata Bay, they hit a snag. The samurai there weren't about to roll over without a fight, so Khan had to switch up his game plan. And just when they were gearing up for round 2, Mother Nature decided to join the party. A wild storm wiped out 200 of their ships, putting a big dent in their conquest plans. But Khan wasn't one to give up easily. He spent the next 7 years getting ready for another shot. In 1281, he came back with an even bigger force, 4,500 ships and 140,000 soldiers. That's a lot of manpower, but the Japanese weren't fazed. They stood their ground, and guess what? Another typhoon swooped in and wrecked Khan's fleet once again. Talk about bad luck. After that, Khan realized Japan just wasn't in the cards for him. They say timing is everything, and those timely typhoons, also known as the divine winds or the Kamikaze, proved it true. You've probably heard of the Kamikaze pilots from World War II, right? Well, after Kublai Khan's failed attempts to conquer Japan centuries earlier, Japan faced another formidable enemy, the USA. But this time, there were no handy typhoons to save the day, so Emperor Hirohito came up with a terrifying new tactic to try and turn the tide of the war. On October 25, 1944, Japan unleashed suicide aircraft against the US Navy for the first time ever. These pilots were given a new name, inspired by the legendary divine winds that had saved Japan before, Kamikaze. Now let me tell you, Japan didn't just stop at airplanes, they went all out, using everything from piloted torpedoes to suicide scuba divers and even human landmines. It was horrifying stuff. You see, at the start of the World War II, Japan's air force was top-notch, but after the Battle of Midway in June 1942, where they suffered heavy losses, they needed a new approach. With resources dwindling, they figured crashing planes directly into enemy ships would cause maximum destruction. Brutal? Absolutely. But there was a certain twisted logic to it. During World War II, most Japanese kamikaze pilots were rookies, lacking the skills for traditional bombing runs. Plus, a lot of the planes they used were old and outdated, not much good for regular combat. So these higher-ups saw them as low-value assets with the potential to take down high-value targets. But not all the planes were old relics. Japan also built purpose-built kamikaze planes like the notorious Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka, basically a big bomb with wings and an engine. The MXY-7 had a short range, so it was carried under a larger bomber and dropped into Allied ships. Nearly 4,000 kamikaze pilots were deployed during the war. Although only about 1 in 5 hit their target, they still took over 7,000 enemy personnel down with them and sunk at least 34 ships, damaging several hundred more. Submarines were also crucial in World War II, sinking thousands of ships and disrupting supply lines. Torpedoes were their main weapon, but they were pretty inaccurate. While homing technology was being developed, kamikaze tactics showed that a human pilot could be a cheaper and more effective guidance system. In February 1944, Japanese engineers came up with the Kiten, or Heaven's Shaker. It was a torpedo with a compartment for a pilot. These poor souls had basic controls, a hand-cranked periscope, and a simple mission: find the nearest enemy ship and crash into it, setting off the torpedo's warhead. In principle, Kitens were like kamikaze aircraft, but the idea of putting pilots inside torpedoes is even more chilling. The problem was the Kitens had to be strapped to the submarine's deck because of their size, forcing the sub to stay near the surface until they were launched. This made them vulnerable. Kitens sank at least 3 enemy ships and damaged others, costing about 200 Allied lives. But due to the dive depth issue, at least 8 subs carrying Kitens were sunk, resulting in the loss of nearly 1,000 Japanese lives. Despite this mixed success, Japanese engineers went on to design a fully fledged submarine version called the Q or Sea Dragon. Those Japanese sure had a flair for dramatic names, didn't they? Anyway, let's talk about some of their wild wartime inventions. First up, we've got the Kairyu, each manned by a crew of 2 and carrying 2 regular torpedoes, not the suicidal ones. The idea was to fire the torpedoes before ramming the sub, packed with explosives into a nearby ship. They had plans for over 750 of these bad boys in 1945, but only 210 were finished before Japan threw in the towel in August. Speaking of throwing in the towel, towards the end of the war, Japan realized victory was pretty much out of reach. The Allies were gaining ground in the Pacific, and the Japanese were facing Operation Downfall, a massive invasion plan bigger than even D-Day. Japan knew it was coming and was prepping to defend their shores. Besides the usual troop gathering and fortifying positions, the Japanese got creative. They trained kamikaze frogmen dubbed Fukuryu or Crouching Dragons. These divers were equipped with mines on bamboo poles, ready to take out enemy landing craft. Crazy, right? They planned to train 6,000 of these guys, but only about 1,200 were ready when Japan surrendered. Now, let's talk land combat. Facing off against heavily armored American tanks like the M4 Sherman, the Japanese needed a new plan. Enter the lunge mine. Picture this, a soldier charging at a tank with a long stick topped with an armor-piercing mine. If he got close enough, kaboom! Tank goes boom along with the lunge miner. But here's the kicker, there is no record of any tanks actually being taken out this way. When it comes to effectiveness, the special attack units, including kamikaze pilots, didn't exactly cause massive physical damage to the Allies, but psychologically, it was a different story. Imagine being on a warship, facing waves of enemy planes diving straight at you. Allied gunners were so terrified of kamikaze attacks that they sometimes ended up firing at their own planes returning from bombing runs against the Japanese. It's a chilling thought. An enemy so determined to kill you that they'd willingly sacrifice their own lives to do it. Many veterans were left deeply shaken by these experiences. However, there is a myth surrounding kamikaze pilots that they gladly embraced their fate. While Japanese culture and traditions did make suicide attacks possible, not everyone in the military agreed to this approach. Many soldiers tried to avoid being selected for such missions, and those who did volunteer often did so under coercion or peer pressure. They felt they had little choice. Japanese Admiral Takejiro Onishi, sometimes called the father of kamikaze, tragically ended his own life in a ritualistic form of suicide called a seppuku the day after Japan's surrender. He left behind a note apologizing to the thousands of pilots that he had sent to their deaths. Typically in seppuku, an appointed individual would behead the victim after they made the initial cut to minimize suffering, but Onishi chose not to have this done. He succumbed to his injuries 15 hours later. And so, the story of the kamikaze pilots came full circle, with their impact more psychological than physical in the end. Well, that's it for today. For now, make sure that you like our video, please share your views in the comment section with us, subscribe to the channel to get updated, and do not forget to hit the bell icon to never miss an update. Thanks for watching the video, see you at the next one.